Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. My name is Joe Sellepack. I'm your host today for the Encounter program. Last year, my wife and I got to visit the Norman Rockwell Museum. I love that museum. The illustrations that Norman Rockwell was able to do over many years through the Saturday Evening Post, as well as for many other things, was very impressive. One of the things that impressed me the most, however, was his 4 freedoms. These were generally made for the bond program leading up to World War II, and they sold these illustrations, and they raised a lot of money for the war effort. The 4 freedoms that Norman Rockwell talks about in his 4 freedoms is the freedom to worship, and he has a person praying, and then there's also freedom from want, and the family is sitting around a nice table with a lot of food on it, and then there's the freedom of speech, and there's a man speaking in a school. The last one is the freedom from fear, and in order to picture that, he has a mother and a father standing over their child that they've just tucked in, and they're praying. Freedom from fear. Freedom from fear is an interesting, being pictured that way is an interesting thing, because family for us is very much supposed to be a freedom from fear, freedom from neglect, freedom from want. Those are important parts of family structures. And family often does that for each other. There's the grandmother and the grandfather who can tuck people in. There's the mother and the father who do it. Family is meant to be something that protects us. What do you think about that? How does family function as a way of protecting kids specifically?
That's a great question, because we all have in our mind that Norman Rockwell picture of mom, dad, pretty house, tucking kids into bed at night. And certainly for a portion of our population, that is what families experience, and it's the ideal for children. But not every child and every family gets to experience that. We have a lot of working parents that can't be there at night to tuck their kids in. We have families that have some issues that are going on that might not make them the parents that they want to be. But as you just a minute ago said, is there somebody else in that family structure that can help step in and provide that stability and that love and that comfort that children need? That would be my goal for children, that here's the ideal, right. But if we can't achieve that ideal, what's the next best thing we can do? Because kids aren't picky.
They are.
They want that stability, they want that love, they want to know that their world is secure. Yeah. And we can do a lot of different things to help provide that for them that maybe are outside the adult idea of what safe and secure should be.
My guest today is Julia Hepworth. She's the Director of Child Protective Services for the Broome County.
Yep.
It's nice to have you on Encounter today.
Thank you.
So Julia, why are we talking about child protection and child abuse prevention right now?
Well, April is Child Abuse Prevention Month, and so it's our opportunity to raise the flag, to remind people that here in your own community, children are being abused and neglected, that across our country, children are being abused and neglected. We often tend to think of this as something that's happening in other parts of the world, but it happens right here. Every night, we have children that are being abused and neglected. We have staff that are on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that are responding to abuse and maltreatment reports. And so April is our time to kind of just remind the community that it's there and that we really need their help in making sure that we have the best outcomes for kids.
So, as director of childhood prevention or director of child abuse, I have some cold medicine going through me right now. So, as director, what is your job like? What do you do?
Sure. So here in Broome County, I'm, as you said, the Director of Child Protective Services. So I oversee the investigative piece of the child abuse and maltreatment reporting system here. And the way that this works is that people call an 800 number and they can make a report of suspected abuse or maltreatment, and that goes to Albany, to a big call center in Albany.
Right.
And then Albany figures out what local community that goes to. And so if it's coming to Broome County, it comes here to us. And I am very fortunate that I have 7 units of super hardworking people that dedicate every day to going out and investigating those reports of abuse and maltreatment and trying to assess whether kids are safe or not safe. If they aren't safe, what can we do to help them be safe?
How many children would be in that category right now?
Well, we are averaging a little over 4,000 reports a year here in Broome County. We've done that for the past couple of years. So, those can be 1 or 2 children households, or they can be 7, 8, 9, 10 children households. So it really varies. And the other piece of it is that we have a lot of families that are mixed households. So, you have a couple of kids at dad's house and you have a couple of kids at mom's house, but some of those houses are coming together. And so how do we make sure that all of that is seamless and smooth and kids are okay?
Now, when we're talking about childhood abuse and neglect, what actually is that?
So New York State says that there are 4 categories of abuse and maltreatment. There is sexual abuse, there's physical abuse, which is what everybody thinks of when they think of child abuse. There is maltreatment, which I will tell you is the bulk of the work that we do.
Right.
And then there is emotional neglect as well. Now, emotional neglect by a standalone category accounts for a very small percentage of what we do, but it's often tied in with all these other categories.
Right.
So a child who maybe is experiencing domestic violence at home may be living with that threat of physical violence, but it may also be having emotional maltreatment as well. So those are the 4 categories, and in Broome County, about 10% of our 4,000 reports are physical abuse cases, and about 70% of what we do is maltreatment.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. And where do the majority of the referrals come from?
So New York State also has categories for reporters. So there's the general public that can call the 800 number. And then there are mandated reporters in New York State, people who are licensed professionals that are required under the law to make reports. So doctors, teachers, principals, counselors, law enforcement. There's a whole list of those people that must make reports, or they can lose their license and they can also face a criminal penalty as well.
So when we're talking about children who have been neglected or abused, oftentimes it also leads to problems throughout their life. It's not just something that the child will experience and then grow out of. What are some of the long-term effects of abuse and neglect?
Sure. So the first, I would say, long-term effect that we see, that we try to deal with every day, is that people tend to parent the way they were parented.
Right.
So we can have this cycle of abuse and maltreatment because people didn't learn any other way to parent. And so one of the first things we want to do is to try to step into that wheel and provide some alternatives. But children who are growing up in abusive households or who are being severely maltreated aren't going to do well at school. If they're not doing well at school, their dropout rates are higher, they might get pregnant early, their ability to get a good job is going to be more difficult for them.
Right.
We'll see more issues with substance abuse, and they may fall into relationships. For example, we know that oftentimes kids that grow up in domestic violence households will end up in domestic violence households as adults themselves. And so those are kind of some of the typical things that if we can't intervene when these children are young, that we may see that perpetuation going on.
Yeah, it seems like at times we have that version of Norman Rockwell's family in our head, and we think, well, you know, all parents are loving and caring and nurturing, and we really need, I think sometimes we want to aspire toward that. However, you know, when children end up going into like therapy for children, they're expressing some problems. They become the identified patient, but it's really looking at the family structure itself at that point, because it's more than just the child that's the product of this system, but this family is kind of helping enforce the problem in the child too.
Absolutely.
To a certain degree. And how does that play out in what you do?
Sure. So I think kind of the typical scenario is you might have a child that's maybe acting out, right? Maybe
Right.
they're skipping school, or they've got some behavior issues, and people are frustrated with their behavior, and so we're going to get them into counseling and we're going to fix them. And a big piece of the counselor's job is to look holistically at that child's life. What's influencing that child that's bringing them to where they are? Is it possible that there is some genetic issue going on? Certainly. But more often than not, they are a product of their environment. They're being influenced by their parents' alcohol use, or the heroin that's going on in their home, or the domestic violence. And so a big piece of it for the therapist is try to identify those and then draw the family in to recognize how that impacts. The other thing I would say is that, as I mentioned earlier, people parent often the way they were parented.
Right.
And so a therapist's job, or a good social worker's job, is going to be to help maybe teach them alternative styles of parenting that might work better for that child. You know, kids aren't one cookie cutter size fits all.
Right.
And parents have to have a lot of tools in their belt sometimes to know, well, this works on this child, but this doesn't work on this child.
Well, you had said before, children are picky,
Yeah.
you know, when we were talking earlier. So in what ways can kids themselves help us parent them?
Well, that's a great question. Speaking as a parent, of course, I want my daughter to be respectful of me all the time.
Yeah, I do too.
But I also recognize that respect's a two-way street, right? And so I have to be willing to listen to her. We have to recognize, I think this is the hard part of parenting. It's hard to recognize that kids' brains aren't fully developed.
Right.
And so they might not have the words sometimes to express themselves or to ask for things the way we want them asked. They can seem very selfish and self-centered sometimes. And I'll tell you what, you know, when you are dealing with life stressors, maybe your job's not going well, maybe you don't have a job in this community, maybe you're getting laid off,
Right.
maybe your marriage is struggling, maybe you're not sure you're going to be able to hang on to your house. So when you have those major life weights as an adult hanging on you, and not only do I want to be able to tuck my child into bed, but I'm worried we won't have a bed.
Right.
And then I have this child whose brain isn't fully developed, and they're sassing me back, and they're doing this or that. You can see where parents can lose it, you know?
Yeah, and what comes to mind automatically is, you know, the child that comes home and says, you know, I've got a field trip coming up, and I need $30
Yeah.
in order to go on the field
Yeah.
trip, and all my friends are going,
Yeah.
and the rest of that, and then the mother or the father says, well, you know, we don't have $30
Yeah.
to give you, and then the child says, well, why not? Then starts sassing, you know, especially in situations like you had just talked about, where they've lost their job, or they have financial problems, or there's something going on in the family. That automatically brings it into an entirely different
Sure.
realm.
Sure. It's very hard for parents, and I'm a parent of an 11-year-old daughter, and it seems that regularly there is, I need this for school, I need this, I need this money, I need this. Even to get involved in her age at some of the sports, it's out of pocket. And so, my husband and I are fortunate we have those resources, but not everybody does. And so then again, you get in this situation where parents want to provide for their children, they want to give the best for their kids. And to not be able to do that, it's frustrating and heartbreaking for them. And the kids don't understand why they can't when other kids can.
So my guest today is Julia Hepworth. We've been talking about Childhood Abuse Prevention Month is April. And so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how communities can help prevent child abuse. And there's a misnomer out there that says most abuse happens from a stranger, so to speak, or something like that. How does breaking that myth kind of help us be able to help children?
Right. So particularly when you're talking about child sexual abuse, it's very important that people understand the majority of children who are victims of sexual abuse are victimized by people that are close to them.
Right.
The idea of the stranger danger, of somebody grabbing your child off of the playground or while they're walking to school, is not the case. Easily 90% of children are being sexually abused by a family member, a friend of the family, somebody that's having close contact with them. And that's part of kind of the game that these offenders play, is how they build their relationship with these children and get these kids to trust them and get their parents to trust that they're an okay person to be around their children. And it's really, for a parent, I think it's one of the scariest things in the world, because you don't want to have your guard up all the time and worry that, oh gosh, my neighbor seems like a nice guy, we're going over for a barbecue, but maybe there's something going on there. But you have to always be alert.
Right.
There's some great training in town that the Crime Victims Assistance Center provides, and it's all about helping parents identify behaviors that they might not have their radar up for.
Right.
And I think it's fantastic training. And one of the things they do in that training, they often show a video, and it talks about a very nice middle-class family that were best friends with their neighbors.
Right.
And
it was a true story.
It was an absolute true story. They vacationed together, they had meals together, they had Thanksgiving together, and it turned out that the neighbor was sexually abusing this family's daughter, and just devastating to them, because it never occurred to them that this was happening right next door.
So as far as the other types of abuse, or how would we be able to see that in a child?
Okay, so physical neglect, as I said, that's the bulk of what we do. So we're talking about kids who are being cared for marginally, right? They're the kids that are dirty, they have chronic head lice, they have medical needs that aren't being attended to, their clothes don't fit them. Maybe in January they're wearing shorts and short sleeves to school, or they don't have boots and their shoes all have holes in them. They're kids that don't have the right food. Their housing is really unsafe. So, those are some of the things that we kind of look for. And I will say that the schools, I think, do a fantastic job at keeping an eye out for those kids. But certainly I would encourage people to think about it in their own community, your neighbor, your friends. We have a lot of people who have lost their jobs and are kind of down financially. And so are they dropping below that minimal standard of care that we'd be looking for? Now, in terms of physical abuse, which is, again, what most people think of when they think of child abuse and the battered child, you have to think about how kids normally look when they are playing, right? Kids get bruised all over. And
They do.
typically, you'll see bruising on the front of their shins,